With a roster containing many fan-favorite fighters, completely broken top tiers, and some truly grisly fatalities which I have to censor, Mortal Kombat 9, or just Mortal Kombat, is infamous for being a killer fighting game, especially within the casual fighting game crowd, and I can speak to this, as I was in love with this game when I was a kid. I still have my original copies that were released here in Australia after its ban was lifted, and one of my favourite qualities of the title was just how much stuff there was to do. From arcade mode, to story mode, to the challenge tower, and even playing online with the world's worst Sub-Zero, I had so much fun playing this game back in the day. But game development isn't exactly what we would call easy, and with how much content developer NetherRealm Studios packed into their bloody baby, some of what they had planned to be in the game never ended up seeing the light of day, and that's what we're here to explore. Before we begin, I'd also like to make clear that I'm getting most of my information from the Cutting Room Floor website. If you'd like to learn more about the cut content of not just MK9, but any game really, please check this resource out. It's amazing and I couldn't have made this video without it. I'll also be dividing cut content into two categories. Firstly, we'll analyze pre-release materials that were demonstrated publicly in early trailers, and then we'll dive into the files of MK9 to see what's hiding in there. Much like a jump scare in the crypt, I wasn't ready for a lot of this stuff, so buckle up and get ready for the cut content, or cut content if you will, of Mortal Kombat 9. June 10th, 2010 was the day that MK9 was officially announced to the world, and with this announcement came a reveal trailer that featured a mix of pre-rendered cinematic visuals and real-time gameplay footage running in-engine. Man, this takes me back. Anyway, at the 33-second mark, we can see Shao Kahn himself, but eagle-eyed viewers will notice that this is his character model from 2008's Mortal Kombat vs DC Universe, which I also still have my copy of. I also booted into this game to compare the models for myself, and they do look about the same, although YouTube's video file compression for the MK9 trailer doesn't help things. Shao Kahn's DC Universe model was most likely placed into MK9's early builds to save on time, as it's not like the developers needed to finish his model before running tests. As far as I know, both MK9 and DC Universe were created by the same teams, and they both run on modified engines of Unreal Engine 3, theoretically allowing assets to be ported from one title to the other with relative ease. Speaking of early character models, Johnny Cage looks similar to his final depiction at a first glance, but you'll quickly notice that this hairstyle is totally different in the reveal trailer. It makes him look like one of those generic Westerns 2000s game protagonists, and it's honestly somewhat uncanny for his regular hair to not be in the trailer. I'm not sure why it looks so different here, but I'm glad it was changed for the final game. Skipping forward a few seconds reveals Nightwolf, who was always one of my favorite characters, but in this context, I'm more focused on the yellow lighting of his body. You would think it would be blue to match the lightning striking his chest, but perhaps this was a leftover from MK vs DC's Rage mechanic? I highly doubt the mechanic itself was intended to appear at MK9, but the visual effect being reused in early versions of this game does check out. On the topic of MK vs DC, the animation for Sub-Zero's freeze attack is reused in the trailer too. Doing a side-by-side comparison of both animations confirms that they are indeed the same, and I assume that this was also reused for time and testing purposes. In release MK9, Sub-Zero's freeze looks like this. Returning to our friend Johnny Cage once again, a quick montage towards the end of the trailer reveals the brand new X-ray mechanic, but if we perform Johnny's X-ray in the final product, it's totally different. What's happening here is that when NetherRealm Studios were debugging MK9 with test characters who were never intended to be playable, this X-ray was given to them as a quick and dirty animation. It doesn't look bad at all, and whether Johnny's actual X-ray wasn't ready to be demonstrated in the trailer, or maybe the devs just didn't want to show it off yet, the test X-ray was included here instead. Finally, the last piece of cut content from this trailer involves this clip of Kung Lao's fatality, which is thankfully censored by the game's logo. However, the fatality itself isn't what we're interested in. Instead, take a listen to Sub-Zero's audio. I would never have caught this for myself because of how minuscule this detail is, but the Cutting Room Floor reports that Sub-Zero's screams are actually from Noob Saibot, and they could only be heard when Sub-Zero is using his Bi-Han alternate outfit. In the final game, if he's using his regular outfit, this is what the fatality sounds like. This game is 14 years old as of me making this video, and this fatality still makes every part of my body just uncomfortably retract. Ugh. That's all there is to see from the reveal trailer, so let's move on to the cinematic trailer. Uploaded onto YouTube on the 17th of April 2011, this trailer was meant to coincide with the title's American launch day of April 19th, and as a result, there aren't many differences when compared to what was released. By the way, I do apologize for the low video quality, but with how old this trailer is, there's not much that I can do. In the battle between Jax and Molina, we can see our cybernetic hero fire a rocket, but this isn't in the game itself. You might think that this move was just added to the trailer just because it looks cool, but it is performable in MK vs DC Universe, so perhaps it was supposed to also appear in MK9? This final detail is something I'm too scared to show in full detail because of how strict YouTube can be, but Scorpion is seen performing the Eat Your Heart Out fatality. If we go back to MK9 itself, we'll find that this is one of Kanos' fatalities, and as such, it's impossible for Old Maid Scorpion to perform it. I think it was given to our yellow ninja friend in the trailer for visual impact though. Unfortunately, that's all there is to cover for this cinematic trailer, so let's move on to when Ed Boon and friends sat down at E3 2010 to give a live demonstration of MK9 to the public. It was really awesome watching this in the present day, so I can only imagine how hyped Mortal Kombat fans must have been back in the day. Hell, they even started clapping after Scorpion performs his fatality. Speaking of which, if we rewind a bit back to when it starts, there's a certain piece of audio you might be able to make out. Take a listen.
So here's Scorpion's fatality.
Did you catch it? The music that plays as the fatality begins is taken from, you guessed it, Mortal Kombat vs DC Universe. If you couldn't tell by now, a lot of assets from MK vs DC were used in early MK9 builds, and this won't be the last time that I mention that game. Another fatality audio difference involves this stage fatality, as the impale sound effect is completely different. It sucks that I'm not able to show it off, but at least you can hear the difference.
Sub-Zero wins.
Moving on to visual changes now, we can see that the super bars in the bottom corners of the screen have a somewhat different design to the bars in the final product. The differences here aren't too major, and despite the E3 demonstrations bars being early designs, I really like how they look. The loading bar on the Versus screen also looks different too, and the character names in the life bars are also written with a different font, and this UI's aesthetic reminds me a lot of the first Injustice game for some reason. In addition to audio and UI changes, there are also animations in this footage that were either changed or can't be normally accessed in release MK9. Scorpion's back throw belongs to Kano in the final game, with his regular back throw looking like this. Even though he seems to be demolishing Sub-Zero, Scorpion ends up losing the second round, and his get-up animation is also lifted from MK vs DC Universe. Nothing else in this match appears to be different, so let's check in on this tag team battle. Right away, we can see that Johnny's hair is back to normal, which is really cool, as well as the startup of his X-Ray being different. If you don't know, Johnny's X-Ray is unique in that it's a counter super, so it's only going to play out if an enemy makes contact with him during the move startup. In the E3 video, Johnny's hands go green in a very obvious attempt to bait the enemy into pressing a button, and this was seemingly changed in the final game to be much less obvious. Also, the test X-Ray animation is no longer present, and although it's not completed yet, Johnny more or less had his proper X-Ray in this build of MK9. But enough about Mr. Cage, let's now focus on his tag team partner. Nightwolf has a very long feather as part of his headgear in this video. This does appear in the final game as part of his character portrait, but it's not actually part of his character model. Maybe it was removed to increase visual clarity? I'm not too sure. The last E3 change I noticed was Melina's X-Ray, as it appears to be the test one I mentioned earlier. Melina's final X-Ray probably hadn't been finished in time for E3, so this animation was given to her instead. Moving on, let's now observe Kung Lao and Reptile. The former forces a camera angle change when initiating a throw, but no such thing exists in regular MK9. Also, in the actual game, Kung Lao's X-Ray begins with him spinning in place, but this doesn't happen in the E3 footage. Finally, Reptile's throw also causes a camera angle shift that is non-existent in the final game. Something I also found online that the cutting room floor doesn't mention is the rumored inclusion of endurance battles. Older Mortal Kombat titles had modes where you could battle multiple enemies back to back with no breaks on one life bar, and aside from certain parts of MK9's story mode and challenge tower, this mode isn't in Mortal Kombat 9. Found on an old website called The Realm of Mortal Kombat, forum user Creed200569 posted a text string on March 31st, 2011 that was believed to have been found in the files of MK9's demo. A lot of what's mentioned here, like online battles, the crypt, test your luck, training mode, etc., did make it into the final game, but endurance mode did not. If this leak is true, then it reveals that NetherRealm Studios intended for Endurance to make its grand return in MK9, and with how Ed Boon mentions that the title was developed as a celebration of the first 3 Mortal Kombat games during E3 2010, I'm inclined to believe this post. Another piece of evidence involves how the final level of the challenge tower is an endurance battle against Goro, Kintaro, Melina, and Shao Kahn, and defeating them all unlocks the Flesh Pit Melina costume, which is exactly what happens in release MK9. That's all I could find regarding pre-release footage and discussion, so now, let's move into the game's files and see what we can uncover. Oh boy, there are a lot of files to cover here, and while some of them are kind of minuscule, others are really interesting. For starters, who here is a fan of Scarlet? While not part of the base roster, our bloodthirsty femme fatale appears as part of the lineup of DLC fighters, along with Kenshi, Rain, and Freddy Krueger, but in a page taken from Capcom's book, some of Scarlet's data is on the disc despite her being DLC. Hacking the game and viewing the Necropolis reveals that her regular and alternate outfits are present and accounted for, and she can even be made playable. Scarlet uses Melina's character portrait and Jane's idol animation, but in terms of her fighting moves, she seems to be somewhat complete when accessed this way. Something that caught my interest is how even though her aforementioned alternate costume is on the console version's disc, you can only access it normally by purchasing the PS Vita version. It's weird how the developers went to the trouble of creating this character model and putting it in the game only to have it removed when Scarlet was officially released. Moving on to other characters, MK9 contains plenty of unplayable NPC fighters that can only be accessed on PC via mods, and I'd like to give a big shout out to Mortal Kombat Legends Ketchup and Mustard for making a video on these NPCs a while ago. The footage I'll be including here in this segment is taken from their video, and if you'd like to learn more, I strongly encourage you to check them out because their channel is amazing. Okay, fanboying aside, these characters can come in two forms. Either they're unplayable bonus fighters that you beat up as part of the game's challenge tower, or they were only used for internal testing purposes. They often appear under the names of DLC base mail or NPC base mail, and they lack many attacks you would expect fighters to have. These characters usually only have a few normals and this obviously unfinished looking command grab, which is perhaps the greatest looking grab I've ever seen in any fighting game. Move over, Armor King. The other characters, like Zombie and Oni, aren't cut content per se, but there's normally no way to access these creatures, and as they were never intended to be playable, I wanted to include them here. These unfinished NPC and DLC characters are speculated to have been used by the developers to test gameplay mechanics and character slot properties, and if you choose DLC base mail on the character select screen, something interesting happens.
Fujin.
For those uninitiated, Fujin is the god of wind in the Mortal Kombat mythos, and he first appeared in Mortal Kombat 4. Upon hearing this audio file, I was under the impression that Fujin was supposed to be DLC for MK9, but with how Ed Boon and his developers like to play tricks on the MK fanbase, I suspect this was put in to trick hackers who had unauthorized access to the inner workings of the game. Speaking of unused audio, there's a crap ton of it to be heard, but before we get into that, let's look at Jax for a bit. We can see here that his submachine gun was meant to be part of his move list, and with how he could use it in MK vs DC, it makes sense that it was originally intended to appear in Mortal Kombat 9. Despite it not being usable in a fight, it's also visible during a fatality and in his test your luck icon. You can see it poking out just behind his head here. Okay, now let's go back to the audio. Expanding on Jax's submachine gun, its audio is still present in the game. This implies that he would have had multiple special moves and a fatality utilizing this weapon, but they were removed. Thunder God Raiden also has some unused audio files, and they would have been used for his lightning attack. The cutting room floor states that the second audio file was intended to play when Raiden charges his lightning projectile, and while he can't do this in MK9, he can do it in MK vs DC. Seriously, I'm shocked at how often we're going back to this game. That's all there is for Raiden, but moving on to the infamous Shang Tsung reveals more cut audio. There are 4 unused files here, and they relate to fatalities. This one was used in his MK vs DC backbreaker fatality. This one was an unused take of his MK9 Bang Bang fatality. And this one was meant to accompany MK vs DC's Hot Escape special move. The website also mentions that this next file was meant to accompany a fatality called Morph, but I wasn't able to find any more information about it. Liu Kang also has 4 cut audio files, and they're all hilarious. These 2 were meant to be played during his bicycle kick special move. This one was meant to be used for his flying kick, and no one here is quite sure where this final piece was meant to be heard. Both Regular and Cyber Sub-Zero have unused audio, with the former having a scrapped pre-battle quote.
Feel death's cold embrace.
Cyber Sub-Zero has an audio clip containing laughter, indicating that he had a win pose that was cut. Shao Kahn also has a bunch of unused audio too, and they're all pretty self-explanatory, so I'm just gonna play them back to back.
I am Shao Kahn. I rule this world. I win. All too easy.
Finally, the announcer himself also has a pretty interesting unused voice line.
Brutality.
That's right, brutalities were meant to appear in MK9, and Ed Boon himself confirmed this on Twitter on the 20th of May 2011. I've always been a fan of brutalities in the older titles, so it's a shame how they never appeared in this game, but to keep things interesting, I want you to keep brutalities in the back of your mind, because we'll be coming back to them later. On the topic of older Mortal Kombat games, how many of you guys have played Deadly Alliance? If you have, I'm sure you remember how every character had their own logo with unique fonts and colors, and some of these appear in the files of MK9. I'm not sure why they show up here, but I presume they were used for testing texture files. There aren't any more character icons or logos I could find, but there are a lot of unused text strings, and these were used for a variety of situations. The first of which relates to the challenge tower. No mercy, quick time event, focus yourself for the final blow to perform a brutality. I suppose there was meant to be a level where you'd need to weaken the enemy and then finish them off with a brutality quick time event, but due to brutalities themselves being cut from MK9, this challenge was also cut too. Heading over to the Necropolis now, every playable character possesses a biography that explains who they are and what they're all about, and despite Goro, Kintaro, and Shao Kahn not being playable fighters, they also contain biographies. Prince Goro has brought much honor to the Shokan race by serving Shao Kahn. His bloody achievements include crushed rebellions and conquered provinces. During the past 500 years, he has been celebrated for winning the last 9 Mortal Kombat tournaments for Outworld. Should he defeat Earthrealm's champion this time, he will become more than legendary. His victory is assured. There are none in Earthrealm who can withstand the might of Goro. Like Goro and Shiva, Kintaro is of the 4-armed Shokan race. Unlike his aristocratic comrades, however, he is of the lower caste Tigrar lineage. As is customary when recruiting Shokan and Centaur into Shao Kahn's service, one of each race must face each other in bloody combat. Kintaro killed his opponent and, in an unprecedented act of bravado, roared for more Centaur blood. Centaurs leapt furiously into the ring to their demise. This savagery led Shao Kahn to appoint Kintaro his personal bodyguard. Emperor Shao Kahn's lust for power is matched only by his ruthlessness. Millennia ago, he overthrew Onaga as ruler of Outworld and has conquered many other realms since. Eventually, he turned his attention to Earthrealm. The Mortal Kombat tournament prevents him from taking the realm by force, but if Shao Kahn's champions win 10 consecutive tournaments, Earthrealm will be his. As long as his champions Shang Tsung and Prince Goro do not fail him, he will be victorious. We're not done yet, however, as Goro and Kintaro also have unused ending text. For millennia, Shao Kahn had toyed with the proud Shokan race, continuously demanding they prove their worth against the hated Centaur. Goro slew the Emperor, ending this indignity. He then used Shao Kahn's blood to paint runic symbols on his body, an ancient Shokan ritual of succession. Suddenly, the runes began to glow, searing Goro's flesh. Incredible power surged through him. Goro became Draython, the Destroyer Prince prophesied to exterminate the Centaur and reunite the Shokan bloodlines. Kintaro's meteoric rise to glory in the service of Shao Kahn had inflated his ego and his hunger for exaltation, but his position as the Emperor's bodyguard had stifled any opportunity for further achievement or recognition, save one. After killing Shao Kahn, the most powerful being in Outworld, Kintaro's fame had grown indeed. He had achieved the notoriety of a traitor. Now hunted by the Centaur, Tarkatan, and Shokan, Kintaro lives a life of exile, a victim of his own infamy. I know that Mortal Kombat is far from Shakespeare, but I love how dramatic the writing is here. It makes the series feel super grand and epic in its scale, and it's partially why I fell in love with Mortal Kombat as a whole as a kid. But I get it, reading is boring and for nerds who write stories about killer monkey dolls and smut for lonely housewives, so I'm gonna reward you with something more interesting. Another shout out goes to YouTube user Neutralization for the footage, as on the 12th of January 2023, they uploaded a video featuring cut special moves. The first of which is Reptile Super Invisibility. This was a version of his iconic move that would stay active for as long as Reptile had meter, so if you activated it with full resources, you could stay partially invisible for a really long time. I assume that this was the reason why the move was cut, and as Reptile already has regular and DX invisibility, a third version would have been overkill. Going back to Goro now, it was planned for him to have an EX ground stomp. We can see that in comparison to the regular stomp, EX's initial jump is longer, and upon landing, the move does really big damage. Knowing MK9, I wouldn't be surprised if this was a low, although it's quite easy to react to the startup. Kung Lao also has his Whirlwind Kick special move from Deadly Alliance, although it was meant to be called Rotate Kick in MK9. I'm not sure why this was scrapped, but aside from the move functioning as intended, its animation is clearly unfinished, especially when he does it in the air. There's also an EX version where he repeats the same animation twice in a row, and this also looks really unpolished, but as the attack wasn't meant to be seen by the player, this makes a lot of sense. Shao Kahn himself also has 4 EX moves that were scrapped, and the first 3 involve his hammer. As they remain unfinished, the hammer itself doesn't render on screen, making these moves look hilarious when performed. When Shao Kahn does EX hammer toss, there's no hitbox, but the shadow appears in the background. His final EX move, Spear Toss, does look normal, but there's also no hitbox, so it's pretty much useless. Sonya Blade also has 2 unused attacks, and these are similar to Kung Lao's moves. The first one is called Bicycle Kick Old, and it stuns the opponent for a whopping 10 seconds. It also has a whiff animation, although this looks unfinished. The other move is just called Bicycle Kick, and this looks a bit more polished. This can also be done in the air, but the startup frames look pretty jank. Unsurprisingly, Sonya's bicycle kicks were also in MK vs DC, so it seems that they were originally planned to be in MK9. Sub-Zero is our final character, and he has a fake version of his ice ball. This isn't too interesting, but there's one more thing that I thought was really cool. A very early version of Kanos' Brutality still exists in the game's files, and it looks like a hit grab of sorts. The animation is clearly unfinished, and as the background doesn't darken, we can tell that this move didn't have much work put into it. A comment I found from YouTube user The Brandon Man reveals that this animation is actually part of the final game's challenge tower, but I wasn't able to find footage of this occurring, unfortunately. By now, it goes without saying that MK9 was subject to a lot of cut content, and I had a lot of fun researching it all. From funny NPCs, cut audio, and costumes that only appeared in the PS Vita port, there was a lot of stuff for me to sink my teeth into when I was researching this topic, and I was surprised at the sheer number of files that I was able to talk about. Out of everything we covered, Brutalities and the cut special moves are the ones that sting the most, as I would have loved for them all to be present within real matches. Even if some of them would have been carried over from MK vs DC Universe, more moves are always cool to have in fighting games, but if I'm being honest, MK9 is still a hell of a good time in its final revision, so it all turned out splendidly well. Mortal Kombat as a whole went through some really rough patches during the 2000s, and I'm so glad that MK9 turned the series' fate around and introduced a whole new era of fans, myself included. Exploring the cut content of the title made me feel like I was a kid again, one with a crippling addiction to all things Mortal Kombat. I wonder if there are any more hidden files that haven't been data mined yet, and if there are, I really hope that we can see them all one day. The Mortal Kombat fanbase has always been very passionate when trying to get to the bottom of every series mystery there is to unfold, and I hope interest in exploring MK9's files can be renewed going forward. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate your time and I hope you had fun. Take care and I'll see you in the next one.